on everyone, my name is Andy, welcome back to another FPL video and something a little bit different this week. Usually we hold these kind of videos for international breaks, but needs must. There's a double game week that's been announced, there's Blank Gameweek's now confirmed, so I thought I'd put together like a little guide video, whatever you want to call it, just going through kind of what the state of the game is exactly, who's blanking, who's playing when, what kind of players we should be looking at, maybe some strategy stuff on chips as well, so plenty to go through. Before we jump into that, I did want to say the video has kindly been sponsored once again by OneFootball. If you want to check them out, there's a handy link in the description below. Get a nice football app for all your FPL needs, kind of lineup news, team news, football news, league tables, live scores and all that good stuff, or you can just search OneFootball on the Android or iOS stores, so make sure to give that a go. It's completely free, link in the description. Otherwise, let's jump into this one, there's a lot to go through. So as the announced double game week is happening this week, I thought we'd start with that and then move on to the blank game weeks afterwards. So first up, we've got Man City options. Obviously Man City and Arsenal are the two teams with a double game week. Man City have got Man United away and then they've got Arsenal at home. Now, lots of people will have different views on how tough these fixtures are. For me, Man United away is not that easy in a fixture. That's not even Man United bias. Man City and Man United have played 3 times this year. Yes, Man City did beat them once 3-1. The other 2 games, Man United have won both of them and only conceded 1 goal in both those games as well. Now, one was a kind of second round or second leg Carabao Cup, not Carling Cup, match. So make of that what you will, but it was fairly kind of strong sides in both those games. So for whatever reason, Solskjaer has done okay against Pep this year. Maybe that won't happen in this fixture. That's kind of up to you to decide. And obviously, Man United are without Rashford, probably still going to be without Pogba, but they do have Fernandes, who is a massive kind of asset to that team. So I think that's quite a tough fixture. But obviously, even if it's only 1 or 2 goals that City scored, De Bruyne could be involved, Aguero could be involved. Basically, whoever plays could be involved, and whoever plays is kind of the problem. Arsenal at home, I think, is a bit easier. I'm not sure they're fully over kind of, not a defensive crisis by any means, but I don't think we were looking to them for defensive returns. I think they've looked better under Arteta. And if anyone's going to go up against Pep at the moment, who better than his kind of right-hand man for most of the season? So I think the Arsenal fixture will be easier. Man United away, of course, there could still potentially be some returns. But the key question is, which players do you even go for? So I'm glad I recorded this now after the Kevin De Bruyne news. So he didn't play in the FA Cup. Now, originally, there's a couple of journalists saying that was because he was just being rotated, rested, whatever, and that kind of made sense. So why would they use him for a game that they would expect to win anyway? But then it's come out afterwards that Pepper said he had a shoulder injury, and that's why he didn't play. So suddenly now there's a little bit of worry about whether he's going to start. Now, it could be mind games from Pep. Maybe he just wanted to rest De Bruyne anyway, and it's kind of mind games for Solskjaer about whether he is or isn't going to play. And he hasn't completely ruled him out. He's basically said he doesn't know if he's going to be available for the derby. So for someone like me that doesn't own De Bruyne, it's kind of good news, I suppose. It doesn't force my hand into having to bring him in. He could still play the Arsenal game, and obviously he could do damage in that. I think he got 19 points in the reverse fixture, which is incredible. I do think it's a slightly different Arsenal team now, though, so I'm not sure there's quite that score on offer, but obviously he could still do very, very well in that game. And there's always a chance that he plays in that Man United game. So potentially owners have actually come off better off here, because you can keep him in the knowledge that he's probably going to be back soon anyway. And if he does play that Man United game, you've got a double game week player that people like me will be put off having. So I think De Bruyne could be the biggest case of don't buy, don't sell, don't bench, and don't captain. Just if you've got him, have him. If you don't, take the risk not to have him. In terms of other players, I think the biggest thing with Man City, and there's no point in me even sitting here trying to guess who Pep is going to play. Aguero, Jesus, Mahrez all started in the FA Cup match. Sterling was on the bench, so potentially he'll be back for the Man United game. Will he also play for Arsenal? It's hard to tell, to be honest, and this is what kind of puts me off. Like when I was originally looking at these options, I was pretty much just going for De Bruyne. The one thing I will say, which I've seen a few people like Late Riser and stuff discuss on Twitter, is that these kind of games, especially Man City, who've got the kind of quality in their team to kind of destroy teams and get lots of points, there is a lot of upside when people are not looking at getting like Sterling or Aguero because they don't think they're going to play both games. If you can nail the one that does, there is potential for a big return if you think that Man United and Arsenal are okay fixtures. So I think it's really hard to tell. I think Walker had a bit of a rest last night. He's been playing kind of week in, week out, so he could be a good option if you want a defensive asset. But again, Laporte is missing. And so for me, I feel like it's De Bruyne or no one still. Aguero could play both games. They've got Burnley after these two and then Real Madrid. So maybe there'll be a rest at some point for some of these players, either in the Arsenal game or in the Burnley game. So I do like Aguero. I think it's not often he's a differential. We've seen how well he can score. Penalties are obviously up for grabs if De Bruyne doesn't play as well. Maybe Aguero's keeping them anyway. So I quite like Aguero. I think Sterling's just been so off form, and there's no guarantee that he plays both these games. That will kind of put me off. And Mahrez, although he's been good when he's played, again, you just don't know if he's going to play. So for me, they're just so much money, I would find it hard to put them in my team. So if you've got De Bruyne, definitely keep. If you really want to punt, I'd look at Aguero. I'm not sure I'd be looking anywhere else personally for Man City. Next up, we've got Arsenal options. Now, I must admit, this is probably going to be one of the worst, if not the worst, double game weeks that we have this season, because not only are we not sure who's definitely going to play, they've obviously got tough fixtures. Man City we've already been through, and Arsenal, they have West Ham at home, but maybe a little bit of a resurgence there for West Ham, so I'm not sure if that's going to be massively high scoring. Like if this was a couple of weeks ago, I would have definitely thought there was a good amount of goals for Arsenal, and there might still be, but I do think West Ham have done a bit better in recent weeks, especially after that Liverpool performance. Even though they lost the game, they did perform pretty well in that one. Obviously, then they beat Southampton as well. And then Man City away, which could be tough. Obviously, no Laporte does help the attackers. I do think he is a huge miss, like everyone else will tell you, in that Man City defence. But it's Man City away. Man City at home are obviously going to have lots of possession. So it'll be tough for Arsenal. And again, a bit like Man City, a lot of their players are expensive. So it's hard to get lots of them in. And then do you want them long term as well in your normal team? So there's all this to make me think there's not worth kind of jumping on 4, 5, 6 players from these two teams. But again, if you want to climb up the ranks this week, then everyone else is kind of ignoring these players. It might be a good time to just go for it. But in terms of Arsenal players, again, defensively, I'm not really sure I'm picking many players. There is one player I've not put up here, which I'm kind of interested in, which is Saka at 4.6 million. Now, he's been playing left back because Kolasinac and Tierney have been kind of out injured and nursing injuries that they're trying to get back from. Tierney might be back soon, so it's a bit of a worry whether Saka would play both these games. But if he does, although he's playing as a midfielder and he's kind of reverse out of position, playing as a left back, he has been quite creative and picked up quite a few attacking returns for Arsenal. So I do like him as a bit of an enabler, and obviously after this game you could potentially keep him on your bench. Pepe has been decent. Obviously, was nowhere near kind of part of the first 11 week in, week out until Arteta came in, or at least in recent weeks he's been more involved. But even he has been rested. So 9.2 million, if he plays both these games, he could be a nice punt. I kind of like him as an option if you can fit him into your team. Obviously, a lot of people have got like Fernandes, maybe Richarlison, 1 or 2 Liverpool midfielders as well. So money is going to be tight. But I do like Pepe as a decent punt. And then up front, you've got Nketiah. Hopefully I'm pronouncing that correct. 4.3 million started the last 2 games. Obviously, Lacazette hasn't really been in the team much under Arteta either. So if you wanted to make like a switch to 3-5-2, Nketiah would really just be played for the double game week. And then most game weeks, you'd probably look to bench him. So he could be a nice option for 4.3. I think that's a bit of a cheeky differential if you didn't want to go for Saka instead. And then Aubameyang, there's no real point in me talking too much about him. We all know about him, 11 million. He's the one I'm getting. He's probably going to be the one I'm going to captain as well. I know there'll be a lot of talk about how Liverpool could do really well against Bournemouth and a single game week player could outscore Aubameyang. And I completely get that. And you know, I kind of almost agree. It's Bournemouth at home. If Liverpool are ever going to come back and get a big score, it'll be that game. But I do not like not going for a double game week captain where I can. It's just more fun. There's 2 games. You know, if Aubameyang smashes it against West Ham, then the Man City game almost just becomes a bonus. He gets at least 2 points for appearances, and then it's job done. So he's the one I'm looking at. I think Nketiah or Saka maybe if you need an enabler, and Pepe if you've got room for a punt. Like some people have got Martial, for example, and I've seen them looking to go for Pepe. I can see why that would be appealing. But Aubameyang's kind of the one that I would want this week, and I'd look to hold as well potentially for the week after against Brighton away. So Arsenal option's decent. I think there's probably more chance of Aubameyang playing both games than most of the Man City options, which is why I like him so much. But that's kind of double game week out of the way. Obviously, you've got to have a think about whether you want these players longer term and how they fit in with your strategy of getting game week 31 players in and stuff like that. But let's talk about the game week 31 blanks, because they're basically confirmed at this point. It doesn't matter whether Man United beat Derby or not on Thursday evening. All the blank fixtures are basically confirmed. So let's talk about them. Southampton versus Arsenal won't be on. So if you're holding lots of Southampton players like McCarthy, Stevens, maybe Danny Ings as well, they're not going to play. Arsenal aren't going to play. So, of course, for the double game week, you've got to look at maybe bringing in some Arsenal players. But you also have to take into account maybe taking them back out or having to bench them in game week 31. So the likes of Aubameyang and Nketiah, whoever it may be. Chelsea and Man City are definitely going to blank as well. Again, Man City similar to Arsenal. Anyone you bring in, you've got to potentially think about taking back out. And you could just use a free hit to not worry about that. And we'll talk about that a bit more in a minute. And obviously, if you're still hanging on to Chelsea assets, they're not going to be there. Newcastle United versus Villa, probably a few less players in most teams, but the likes of Lascelles, Grealish obviously going to miss out. Norwich versus Everton. So Norwich beat Spurs. A lot of people were hoping that Spurs would go through, so that Spurs versus West Ham would be called off. But because Norwich went through in the penalty shootout, Norwich versus Everton has been called off. So any Richarlison holders or Calvert-Lewin, they're not going to play in Game Week 31. I think a lot of people were hoping that they would be. So that's a bit of a frustration for owners. And obviously, if any of you got like Cantwell or Duda as backup for Norwich, they're not going to play either. Man United versus Sheffield United, lots of people will be on kind of 1 or 2 Sheffield United defenders, maybe Fernandes and co. For Man United as well, so you've got to keep an eye on that one. And then Leicester versus Brighton, so a few people would have got Leicester assets in for Norwich and Villa, and obviously quite a few holding Vardy still, so they're not going to play. They're probably easy switches, to be honest, the likes of Jota and co. But again, we'll talk about that a bit more in a minute. And Brighton are also going to blank, so any player from these teams will not be playing in Game Week 31. And maybe even more importantly for Game Week 31, who's actually playing? I know the graphics on screen are not exactly that interesting, but I wanted to get this up quick. So obviously Game Week 29 and Game Week 31 are getting close. So who's actually playing this week? So Wolves versus Bournemouth we already knew about. Burnley versus Watford we already knew about before this week. But because Liverpool lost to Chelsea, they will now play in Game Week 31. So that's great news for anyone that's not looking to free hit. Because most of us have got 2 or 3 Liverpool players already. Perhaps not too many Crystal Palace options or players in our squads right now, but they are now options. And like I said, because Norwich beat Spurs last night, Spurs versus West Ham will be on. So if you're holding like Dele Alli or Aurier, whoever it might be, they will play in that fixture, as long as they're not injured, of course. And for some of us that had Son, it's a bit frustrating he's not available for this one, but could still be an option. So what I wanted to do is, rather than go through every single team and talk about every single player potential, I've kind of gone for some key players that might be worth looking at, either bringing in or holding if you already own them for Game Week 31. I will say I'm not going to go through Liverpool players, because let's be honest, we already know 2 or 3 Liverpool players are still pretty good, even if they're a bit out of form recently. Like I said, I think Bournemouth is the perfect time to rectify that. And I don't think there's much use in discussing Liverpool in this video. So I'm going to go for about 9 players from the other teams that you might want to consider either buying or holding. Maybe a bit like Liverpool, perhaps you already know this, but let's talk about the Wolves players, especially because a lot of us are probably holding some of them already, but don't necessarily have the most ideal ones. And I think one of the things with kind of blank game weeks is a lot of the time we get kind of pulled into bringing in a player, even though we don't really want them, maybe 2 or 3 weeks before the actual blank game week. We hold them 2 or 3 weeks, they don't get many points. We play them in the blank, they don't get many points, and then we're kind of stuck with them. I do think Wolves, and obviously Liverpool as well, are kind of different, because they've got good fixtures now and they've got a fixture in the blank, and they might even be worth holding longer term anyway. So I think the 3 on screen are the 3 that I would like to have. So Doherty, Jota, Jimenez. It doesn't mean you have to rip up your teams necessarily to get these particular 3 in. For example, I've talked about how if you've got Saiss already, he's a lot cheaper than Doherty. I do think he offers attacking returns as well. Maybe not quite as much as Doherty, but you do pay a massive premium for that. So Doherty would be the one that I would want, but if I had Saiss, I'd be pretty happy. I actually have Bolly in defence. And like I said, I do think I've made potentially a mistake there. I've paid a bit more money versus Saiss, who may play anyway, or should keep his place, and obviously has a bit more goal threat anyway. But I don't think that's necessarily worth a transfer right now. I think either way, I'm going to cover the clean sheet with Bolly. It's just, will he get an attack and return? Will Doherty or Saiss? I think when it comes to centre-backs, Saiss is getting more attempts in the last few matches, but we've seen Bolly score goals before, so I'm not completely worried about owning him versus the other 2. But if I was kind of using a free hit, for example, or looking to bring in a Wolves defender now, I'd want Doherty. I'd take Saiss as a backup. If you've got Bolly, I wouldn't worry too much. Jimenez is obviously a mainstay. He has been for most of the season. He's 8 million now, so he's 1.7 million more than Jota. So I kind of talked about this on another video already this week, that if I had to bring in one and I was really stumped for cash, I would be pretty happy just to have Jota. Personally, I would like to have both of them. I just think that Jimenez has been so good, so consistent, no matter which kind of formation they play, which team they play, or whatever it might be. Whereas Jota, we've seen quite a streaky player. He's just coming to some form now, and I expect that to probably continue for a good few weeks, maybe even till the end of the season. So I do really like him as an option. And I think at a time when Ings has only scored like once in 6 games, maybe people haven't jumped on Calvert-Lewin yet. He's a great player to bring in. So I really like triple Wolves. I think they're good right up until the blank and afterwards. So they would definitely be where my focus would be after Liverpool. So I've got another 3 players here, Pope, Sarr and Deeney. I'm sure you've all heard of them. So Pope, obviously, if you're a bit like me, You took him out around game week 22-ish because Burnley hadn't been keeping many clean sheets at all. They were conceding plenty of goals. Didn't really look like they were going to turn that around either. So we made the kind of sin of getting rid of a goalkeeper and using a transfer on a goalkeeper, which you should never do, really. We've talked about that before. It never seems worth the upside, really. And he has absolutely smashed it since. And obviously, there's nothing to say that will necessarily carry on. Maybe this is the purple streak and he's going to go into kind of a patch of not doing so well. But if you need a goalkeeper in game week 31, so for example, I've got McCarthy and Henderson, I've got no goalkeeper playing that week. So I might consider switching one to Pope or maybe even Foster. Now, I've not put Foster on here, but I'll talk about fixtures for Watford in a minute. He could be worth maybe a bit of a longer hold than Pope. But either way, they're around the same price. So Pope or Foster could come in. Obviously, I like what Pope has been doing. And if you're in that situation now where you're maybe thinking of bench boosting later on and you've not got a wild card or you've got 2 rotating keepers anyway, it might be worth bringing in Pope to kind of rotate with a Henderson or a McCarthy, whoever it might be. And then you don't have to play them every single week. You can try and play them in the best fixtures. And obviously, you have a goalkeeper for game week 31. So I like Pope, but I would definitely give Foster a shout out as well. And in terms of Watford players, so Sarr and Deeney definitely on the list. I think the Watford just look different when Sarr is in the team. Deeney's really great at kind of hold-up play and causing defenders problems in kind of being up in their face, I suppose. Whereas Sarr has that ability to get in behind. He's got pace, and we saw that against Liverpool. And it's not just that Liverpool game. Again, I've already spoken about this week, but it's not just that Liverpool game. It's also how well he performed before his injury as well. So for 6.3 million... The thing I like about Watford is they've got something to fight for. Their fixtures aren't amazing beforehand, but they're good, or decent enough, I would say. They play in 31, and the fixtures afterwards are quite good as well. So the one thing with Game Week 31, if you're considering free hitting or not, is if you're not, you want players that you're happy to hold after the blank game. And I think Watford players are in that category. So 6.3 million for Sarr, 6.2 million up front for Deeney. So like I said, cheap strikers looking really good. I'm going to get Aubameyang this week, but I don't know if I'll hold him that long term. So the likes of Deeney, Calvert-Lewin, Jota, Jimenez, they're all nice and cheap. Even Ings could play himself back into our teams, but obviously doesn't play in Game Week 31. So I'd definitely consider these 3. I think Sarr and Deeney are definitely on my radar. And by I don't know when I'll get them in, but by 31, I may even have both of them. So last 3 players here, and obviously heavily influenced by the way the fixtures fell. Wouldn't have been Ali and Antonio had Spurs won last night, but they didn't. So that's job done there. Let's start with Charlie Taylor. I do think psychologically having to pay 4.3 feels a lot worse than having to pay 4.2, even though it was only 0.1 million difference. But the thing I like about him is there's not a huge amount of kind of 4 million defenders anymore, like the likes of Lundstrom and maybe Kelly we had at times. But around the 4.2, 4.3 million mark, Taylor, you don't necessarily need to play him every single week. You could just save him for the good fixtures. That's kind of what I've done. I've played him the last 2 weeks, but I probably won't play him this week. He's just kind of in my squad sitting there, and he can wait till game week 31 if needs be. I don't have to play him every single week. So he's a bit of an enabler, a little bit attacking as well for Burnley, so potentially could get some attacking returns there. And obviously if Pope keeps up his clean sheet, Taylor covers them as well. So I quite like Taylor. It's kind of a set and forget. Not everyone, not set and forget on my bench almost. Not every player you bring in has to play every single week, obviously. And then the other 2 kind of I've picked out, maybe it's slight differentials. Ali maybe not quite as much, although I'd expect if you went and checked around your rank kind of top 10k, he's probably not that heavily owned. And Antonio as well. I've actually been quite impressed with Antonio. Again, kind of stemming from that Liverpool game. He gave the defenders something to think about. And I kind of think him up front has really helped West Ham over the last couple of games. Obviously, they've got Haller as well, but Antonio's a different kind of player. He's more of... He's strong like Haller, but he's got way more pace. And again, a bit like Sarr, I suppose. He causes defences different kinds of problems. So 6.9 million, a bit of a differential. And after the blank, they've got pretty good fixtures as well. So make sure to check that if it's a player that you want to hold long term. Obviously, if you're just going to get them in and out, it's maybe not worth it. But Antonio could be an option. And Ali, if you want to go for Spurs, then perhaps he's the best option as long as he's fully fit at the time. Obviously, they haven't got Son and Kane. They're not doing great recently. They haven't looked good either. So personally, I wouldn't necessarily be looking at bringing in a Spurs player. But if you're free hitting, I think it does make it a bit different because you could just take a chance on that Spurs versus West Ham game. Maybe get Aurier in as well if you don't think the West Ham are going to score. And you could kind of go for it. I do think if you're not free hitting, it makes it a bit tougher to kind of... almost justify bringing in a Spurs player. But around the 8 million mark, if you wanted someone from midfield, then Ali could be an option. So that's kind of the 9 players that I've picked out. I'm sure there's other players that you're thinking of. Let me know in the description below if there's anyone, or in the comments below, I should say, if there's anyone that I've massively missed out. As if by magic, I've moved over to the other side of the screen for the last bit, what to consider for Game Week 31. Now, obviously, I cannot go through every single different chip strategy in this video because there'd be so many based on what your team looks like now, what chips you've got left. I've only got free hit. Some people have got all their chips left: wildcard, free hit, triple captain, and bench boost. And obviously, everyone is different. I'm saying that I'm not going to free hit in game week 31 because my team, I think, is okay to go through that game week. But that might be different for you. So you kind of got to think about that. So you need to plan, basically. You need to start planning. Take a look at your team. Have a look how many players you've got for game week 29 and how many you actually want. I'm only going to go in with Aubameyang, and I'm pretty much perfectly okay with that. I wouldn't usually be okay with a double game week involving Arsenal and City going with just one player. But the way it's fallen, I kind of am okay with that. So think about that. And obviously, how many players have you got in game week 31 playing right now? How many do you want to bring in as well? So the reason I say that is I've got Traore, for example. I'm not even counting him as a player for game week 31 because I'm not convinced he'll necessarily start. I also have Firmino, who I don't necessarily want to hold from Liverpool. So I'm not really counting those two when I think about my game week 31 team. But I do have a plan which basically involves Firmino to Aubameyang this week. And then by the time game week 31 comes around, I'll do Aubameyang to Jota. That'll get me another game week 31 player. Traore will leave for Mane, and that'll give me my third Liverpool player as well. And then I'll just kind of build from there. So that's kind of my plan. And I do think you don't need a full set of players either. So if you're not going into the blank with 11 players, that doesn't necessarily matter. Now, some people will think like that. Other people will think, well, that gives me an opportunity on the free hit to get a full set of 11 and maybe make some points up. And that's absolutely a strategy you should look at. And I do think you should consider different chip strategies now, given that you know how the blank game week has fallen. So before, kind of almost back in game week 1 or kind of a few weeks after, there's always talk on Twitter, especially from the likes of kind of Ben Crellin. I know Planet FPL podcast do a lot on this. Fantasy Football Scout write a lot about blanks and doubles as well, of course. About how game week 31 was going to be the time to use your free hit chip. But actually, the way it's come about, the fixtures that are on, the players that are already in our teams, you know, like I've already said, Wolves and Liverpool are in form. Maybe you don't need to use it that week. And so for me, I've got no wild card, so I can't even plan around that. There's talk about double game week 34, maybe not having too many double game weeks, basically, and actually being almost like a single game week. There could be a couple of fixtures. Again, keep an eye on all those people I've mentioned to find out the news about that. But if there's only a couple or even no double game weeks in game week 34, then suddenly you don't necessarily need a wild card or a free hit chip in that week to kind of navigate it. And it sounds like game week 37 is going to be the big week of double game week. So for me, with only a free hit chip left, I'm looking at just using it then. I'm going to build towards game week 31. All my fixtures after game week 31 are basically just covering game week 32 to 36 and then 38, of course, afterwards. And because I'm using my free hit chip and the double, I don't need to worry about whether the player I'm bringing in has a double or doesn't. It doesn't matter because they're not going to necessarily have that. I'm not going to have that worry in game week 37 because I'm playing the free hit. Now, there could be fixtures moved in other game weeks to have double game weeks like game week 33, 35, 36, but we don't know yet. So there's only so much planning you can do. But your first course of action has got to be check how many players you've got for 31. Decide what strategy you want to build around the chips. You could wildcard now, free hit in 31, and then just build towards game week 34 and 37 afterwards. You could wildcard after game week 31, kind of dead end into 31, make all your transfers based around that game week, and then wildcard to a different team in game week 32. So there's loads of different ways you could do it. And obviously the thing I like about dead ending to game week 31, for example, for that one, is it's only a couple of game weeks away. It's not like you're having to plan 3 or 4, 5 weeks ahead and then having to hold those blank players for a long time. You're only holding them for kind of 29, 30, and then bam, they're playing in 31. So it's not that bad to do that. But there's lots of different strategies. Again, let me know in the comments below which way you're going. I do think it's potentially a good time for a few differential picks as well. You know, if people are talking about leaving out City and Arsenal players, maybe that's your chance to be a bit different. If people are talking about not free hitting game week 31, maybe that's your chance to do it. You know, maybe no one's going for Antonio because West Ham are rubbish. Well, actually, he's looked pretty good, and the fixtures after 31 are okay as well. Maybe it's time to get him in. Maybe you captain someone different. Obviously, it's a bit different now with De Bruyne potentially missing out. But a lot of people were looking at maybe De Bruyne, so you could have gone to Aubameyang or vice versa, whatever it might be. So it's a good time for differentials. You can get some big scores out of these double game weeks. So I wouldn't ignore them, but it's definitely some planning to do around it. That is it for this one. Hopefully you enjoyed it. I've not even checked how long it was before recording this kind of intro and outro. So hopefully it wasn't too long, but at the same time, when you're talking about confirmed double game weeks and when you're talking about confirmed blanks and all the different kind of strategies and players to consider and what's happening, obviously it's going to be a long one. So hopefully it wasn't too long, but hopefully it was long enough that you kind of enjoyed it and it was actually useful. If it was, make sure to give it a like and also subscribe if you're new around here. Hit that notification bell so you know when all the other videos and stuff are going live. I'll be back as normal Thursday evening at 9 o'clock to live stream and go through kind of Q&A, talk you through my plans and stuff like that as normal. And then we'll have all the normal content next week as per usual. And leave me a comment below. Let me know what you thought about this video. And also if you've got any kind of thoughts around chip strategies, let us know what chips you've got and what your strategy is. Kind of how many players you're going with for Game Week 31, how many players you're going with for Man City and Arsenal, are you going to use that to make up ground, that kind of stuff. And obviously if you've not already checked out OneFootball, it's completely free. Click that link in the description below, it'll take you straight through to where you need to be. Otherwise I'll leave it there. Good luck with the doubles and blank game weeks. I know it kind of gets a bit kind of all in at this point, like kind of a bit intense, but it is one of my favourite times of the season. There's lots to plan, there's lots of rank to be gained if you get it right. But it's time to start planning. So good luck with that. I'll catch you next time. Cheers all.